welcome to another edition of the Economy and Politics Show, where we discuss developments in the economy and how it affects the populace in Nigeria. Today we have a very interesting topic. We'll be looking at achieving transparency and accountability in Nigeria's oil and gas sector. As you all know, the oil and gas sector accounts for over 90% of Nigeria's revenue at the moment, and that is why it's important to check and see how we're doing in that regard. Nations that have achieved developments that are oil producing have taken this seriously. Nigeria will not be an exception. To lead this conversation is Tengi Ikoli. She's the program coordinator for Nigerian Natural Resource Charter, NNRC. Nice to have you on the program, Tengi.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Good morning. Now let's first look at the Petroleum Industry Bill. Amidst all the reforms we're seeing and all the steps, policy steps taken by government, it has been described that if this is passed and signed into law, it will help to sanitize and stabilize the oil and gas sector. As a key player, advocates for transparency, efficiency in the sector, what are your thoughts around this current PIB that is being deliberated at the National Assembly, and how critical is it when signed to bring this sanitization to the sector?
The Petroleum Industry Bill is very critical to the sector because it has the effect of overhauling the petroleum sector and all the gaps that we have, all the inefficiencies, the transparency issues, licensing issues, the issues that prevail in the sector predominantly will be resolved if the Petroleum Industry Bill is passed and implemented. This is a holistic bill. The previous bill that was considered by the 8th Assembly had been broken down into different parts, but this bill takes into cognizance the governance components, issues of upstream, downstream, midstream. It seeks to strengthen the regulator. It seeks to remove all the anomalies around the sector. It would affect the downstream deregulation of the sector. It would affect stranded assets. It will open up potential for jobs, form our company. So it will also make sure that benefits that are meant to accrue to those in the Delta, where these resources are extracted from, would actually benefit from them. So it takes a look at the whole sector. And as you said, rightly so, it seeks to sanitize in that way and to stabilize by providing a lot more clarity, which we haven't had over the past 2 decades, where the Petroleum Industry Bill has been considered.
Wow. I mean, very interesting to hear those thoughts. Particularly of interest is the host community where oil is produced, the Niger Delta, resolving how they will be compensated over time, and even the issue of strengthening regulations, the licensing issues, very, very critical, and also the fact that it's a holistic bill compared to what the 8th Assembly had. We just can't wait to see this bill being signed into law. We're initially hearing that maybe that will happen in first quarter, but now we're looking at second quarter. We just don't want this to delay too long so that we can get all those critical investments that we need. You know that it's a global competition with other oil producing countries. So it's very important. But thanks for those first perspectives.
Yeah, very much so. Very true.
Definitely. Now, there's another aspect. Recently looking at countries that have state oil and gas companies, top 10 valued oil and gas companies in the globe. And I was looking at companies like Saudi Aramco, which is the state-run oil company of Saudi Arabia, and Sinopec of China. Now, those two companies have an interesting feature of being listed on the market, and they have created huge values for the market. For example, Saudi Aramco, when it was listed in the Tadawul Exchange of Saudi Arabia, pushed that market. It's now a $1 trillion capitalized market. I just want to speak around the value of leveraging the capital market to liberalize oil and gas company and assets in Nigeria. I'm thinking about the NNPC. I mean, when this PIB is signed into law, the prospect of listing some segments of the NNPC and even looking at the government share in the LNG, the gas company. What would you be saying to this issue of liberalizing them through the market? Analysts and experts have said this is a very big move if it's done.
That's a very interesting perspective that you have shared. And it's also been a conversation of the Petroleum Industry Bill. We had, during the last iteration, you had that clearly stated that the national oil company will be made publicly traded available. It would be on the capital market, and then also attract the necessary funding, because that's one of the most attractive components of things. NNPC has had issues in terms of being able to capitalize, being able to fund these JV projects, and a lot of different fiscal issues in terms of the fiscal modeling. So that's the advantage that presents. Unfortunately, the NNPC is actually not properly capitalized in the PIB. There's a lot of speculation as to why that might be the case, because it's not clear, and that provides already out of the gate, those problems that we're trying to resolve are not being addressed at this point. You made the very good point about Saudi Aramco having been capitalized. 25% of that is capitalized, 75% is still state-owned. You have Equinor's Norway's Equinor, which also has 67% also being owned by the state, but for about 33% is also capitalized. You have Petrobras's Brazil's Petrobras also having 53% state-owned, and that also. And when you see these companies, you see a lot of profits, whereas in comparison, you've seen NNPC with a lot of losses consistently. So what does that tell you? That clearly the model has to be changed slightly. Even with the NLNG example that you gave, Nigeria also has seen a lot of profits in that space, but not as a problem that we're really needing to resolve even right now. You have other advantages as well from having NNPC being able to be made available to the private sector. When you have NNPC being publicly traded, you have it being obliged to have audited accounts. We saw recently when NNPC provided audited accounts, but they were obliged to do this over the last decades, but they had only done this once.
What is your position on this refinery rehabilitation? Because it's not just Port Harcourt we're looking at. They're also going to do this in Warri and Kaduna. And already a technical partnership has been signed between NNPC and a technical partner in rehabilitating the refinery.
Our submission, in fact, we had provided a couple of suggestions in terms of how to deregulate the downstream sector, and that was one of our chief focus areas, where we had advocated for the government to privatize the refineries or provide key private sector expertise, because we have seen that where private sector comes into play, there's a lot more accountability, a lot more transparency, a lot more efficiency and likelihood of getting returns. The government has done turnaround maintenance on its refineries for over the years, and we still have only about 10% to 11% utilization of those refineries. What's going to be different? And also in terms of that fund, isn't it better to let it go? Because again, we saw in 2020 when Nigeria actually had to revise our budget because we didn't have sufficient funds coming in from oil. This does not look like the best use of our funds. But if it is, we need a case as to why that was decided. So a lot more questions than answers in terms of this regard. But we're still committed to the idea that, and the proposition that the government should privatize those refineries and take their hands off.
Okay, privatize the refineries. It's still up for debate.
Or at least reduce their entitlement to it, as we have seen in LNG, that model works.
Okay, the LNG model works, and some very top Nigerian figures have called for a big debate on this, though government is showing that they are already making their move. Not even sure that they want to open up for debates, because what they've already done with Port Harcourt Refinery shows where they are headed. But of course, the CSOs we expect will continue to push for accountability in this whole process so that we don't have this same experience of the past. But let's look at the decade of gas agenda. I mean, our government is, like you rightly said, we're looking at renewable energy. We're looking at divesting from fossil fuels. And for Nigeria, gas is very key. But the place of transparency is very key in this agenda. And we'd like to know if the NNRC and other CSOs are being engaged, and how you intend to drive that transparency, calling for it and ensuring that government is clear in how it's driving this agenda.
So as you've mentioned, there's a lot of potentials for gas to power, gas to industrialization, and a lot of benefits that can come from it for Nigerians in terms of jobs, because gas has been proven to be an enabler, and it creates a lot of jobs, it creates a lot of opportunities for SMEs, etc., and just for the government and Nigerian economy to thrive and to grow. So it's a very key sector, and it's very important that we get it right out the gates. One of the issues that you've had in terms of gas is in terms of the fact that you have it's very capital intensive out of the gates, and very similar to the scenarios that you have with deep offshore investments in terms of the oil component of things. So it's very important that we get the fundamentals right. And there's a lot of transparency in terms of how things are going to be managed, creating an enabling environment for that sector to thrive, that both the private sector, Nigerians as a whole, also all the players understand what the components are. There's a level playing field in terms of how that sector is going to be managed, so that all the prices are competitive across board, so we're able to attract the necessary investments that we need for that sector. Like I said, it's very capital intensive, so you require a lot of clarity in that space for those investors that are coming in, because we need a lot of foreign direct investment. And we've seen generally that Nigerians have not been the destination of choice, even in oil, because of the lack of clarity that we've had in terms of our fiscal terms. We had the Deep Offshore PSC Act passed a couple of years ago, which was beneficial to Nigeria, but still we then had the PIB, which was also proposing to review that. So that provides a lot of uncertainty for investors, and just for Nigerians, for even local or national companies that want to play in that space as well. Everyone then has a wait and see approach, which is not beneficial to Nigeria, because again, like you said, we need to transition away even from oil using that. So for Nigeria to be able to replace the revenues that it might lose from the oil space, it has to start to attract the necessary funds and get the necessary infrastructure deployed, which takes investment, which takes clarity, which ensures that there is clarity around the issues, as a level playing field around the sector, that we have gas pricing terms that are very transparent and are very clear, which ensures that there's no distortion. You have NLNG and LME petrochemicals, which have favorable terms to ensure that we have the private sector is also coming on stream to enjoy similar terms, and there's clarity and a level playing field across the space. And then we learn from the oil sector those issues that have pervaded, and ensure that we've had those issues in the oil and gas sector, and we try to resolve those as well.
I mean, this is very important. So we said of gas pricing, like you said, level playing field, and resolving the issue of the deep, like what we saw in the deep offshore, the PSC, which the PIB. A lot of these things that what PIB can really address. So it still goes down to how the PIB is going to be holistic to ensure that even the gas space is covered effectively. But as we wrap up, let's talk about it's Nigerian Natural Resource Charter. So your group also looks at natural resources, and we have solid minerals too. What's being done in that area to engage key stakeholders to ensure that, as we have really focused on oil and gas, we look at other resources. Every state has a resource, but our solid minerals mines steel ministry will ensure that these resources are developed. There's a transparent process. Take example, what is happening in gold in Zamfara and other prospects of resources. They are managed and in a transparent manner.
Solid minerals, as well as you've mentioned, which is very critical, is being able to expand Nigeria's economic revenues. So right now, obviously, we're very still dependent on oil and gas. Obviously, we have our budget even pegged on oil production and oil pricing. But what we need is to expand that so that we don't have the scenario that happened in 2020, where we had to have our budgets. So if we have more revenues coming in from solid minerals, I mean, at the moment, you only have 0.85% coming into the GDP from solid minerals. And so that tells you that there's a lot of leakages in terms of what can be gotten from the solid minerals. As you said, we have in every state some natural resource, which could be some resource that could be beneficial to and pulled into the space. So a lot more clarity, a lot more systems have to be put in place. Again, you've seen the conflict that has happened in Zamfara already. and we haven't even fully expanded the space. So we need a lot more clarity. We need the oil companies being clearer in terms of what their fines are. We need the Ministry of Mines to get in there a lot more. We need a lot more regulation in terms of that as well, because we're losing too much money, and that space has a huge potential that Nigeria can benefit from. So it's so necessary to ensure that there's clarity in terms of that. There is a lot more conflict resolution as well has to be put at the fore, so we don't have a repeat of what happens in Zamfara across all the states in Nigeria. We have to make sure that we're looking at providing data to investors, both local and international, in terms of what we have and what the potentials are. A lot more still can be done in that space. And we need to be able to operate this and learn so much lessons from the oil and gas sector that we've seen to avoid those mistakes. The Mining Act as well has to be updated to incorporate what we have going on, what the real cases are, because we need to do that now. If Nigeria doesn't take all those right steps in place now in terms of the institutional reforms, the regulators within that space as well, if we don't have a lot more clarity in terms of data, we don't have a lot more structures in place as well in terms of what the receipts and returns can be from that space as well, we're going to lose out on so much. And when this global energy transition happens, Nigeria will be at a loss because we wouldn't have fully gotten an alternative in terms of solid minerals where the potentials are there.
Now, a lot of things you've said are very clear. From the PIB, it's holistic, but we need more clarity and we need commitment for it to be passed and signed into law in terms of the issues around driving transparency, role of the CSOs. It's important that government understands that we need to have a more private sector approach to refineries, rehabilitation, and driving value from it. We are a very rich nation in resources. We have no business being one of the leading country with people that are poor. That's poverty capital of the world. We don't have to have such index. We also do not need to have such index of a high unemployment rate of over 28%. All this can be done if there's transparency and accountability in sectors like oil and gas and natural resource. So we implore you to continue in the role of driving that accountability to the NNRC, and we hope government will embrace all these suggestions and interactions because it's very important for our sector to derive value to the economy. But thank you once again, Tengi George Ikoli, for the time, Program Coordinator of the Nigerian Natural Resource Charter, for this conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And that'll be all for this edition of the Economy and Politics Show. Go to our website, www.prochange.com, and on the right hand of the bar scroll, you check on oil and gas. We have so much stories captured around the sector, and even some stories that have come from the Nigerian Natural Resource Charter and Advocacy Group, calling for transparency and accountability in the sector. Let's keep this conversation on the oil and gas sector. It's a big revenue earner for Nigeria, but without transparency and accountability, we will have challenges. It's very important that we keep this conversation. So if you have a question, suggestion, or views around how we can achieve transparency and accountability in the oil and gas sector, send your views and comments to news@prochange.com. We'll be glad to respond to them and discuss around them with you. Till next edition, don't forget in this period, please stay safe. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.